Отже, ви вважаєте, що Україна слабка? Ха! Тоді дозвольте мені представити вам підсилювачі Flux Lab. 16 Вт чистої потужності класу A. Міцна, бездоганна конструкція та просто вбивчий зовнішній вигляд. І звук. Ви заберете усі свої слова назад після того, як послухаєте один з них. Бодай протягом хвилини. Звісно, якщо пощастить. Ціни на ці чудові підсилювачі становлять $499 за FA12S та $749 за FA10. Усі підсилювачі Flux Lab виготовляються вручну на заводі в Україні. Будьмо!
While Flux Lab Acoustics is a relatively unknown company in the West, don't let their lack of popularity here fool you. Flux comes from a long line of amazing Eastern European amp builders such as Auris, Felix, Trafomatic, and more. Now let's quickly dive into the sound. There is definitely a house sound from Flux when it comes to both the FA10 and 12S. There are 3 words I'd use to sum up their sound signature: airy, clear, and authoritative. Let's take a jazz song, Waltz for Debbie by Bill Evans Trio. At about 20 seconds, you can hear people eating in the background of the venue that they're playing in. I know it's just background noise, not the actual music that's playing. Who cares, right? But I was surprised at how much more detailed this bit was over the SA1 and also the A90. It could be because this is a brighter amp. It's very, very bright. Maybe you'll pick up higher pitched sounds more, I'm not sure. But either way, the level of definition and texture from these odds and ends of songs was pretty delightful to hear. As for the sound signature, overall it's very similar to the SA1. That crisp, airy, transparent sound with a smoother edge compared to the Drop 789 and topping. So that delicious Class A graceful sound is also very apparent here, where notes don't just quickly disappear, but they sort of trail off and may run into the next, while still having this sense of control and transparency. This trailing effect or graceful decay doesn't last as long as the SA1, but it's still there, it sounds nice, and Flux is able to do it here with the utmost clarity. And what's amazing about the FA10 is the effortless power delivery. The standout quality is how far it can stretch your headphones to its limits. Take a normally subdued headphone like a ZMF or a Sony Z7, run it through this amp, and it feels like the FA10 persuaded those cans to snort a line before hitting play. It's like a jolt of caffeine to your eardrums with this constant stream of high-octane energy. And the best part is the energy is extremely clean at all levels. I feel like nothing suffers as you turn the volume up. And let's discuss DAC pairings. For most of my tests throughout this video, I defaulted to the Cutest as I love its precise yet natural signature compared to other DACs. But for the Flux FA10, this is the first amp here where I actually reached for my R2R DAC even more, which was the Aries 2. These two have such great synergy. When I started having complaints about mids being farther out on the Cutest, I'd switch to the Aries, and the vocals inched up a bit further to a more noticeable level. It was a great mix of the intimacy and organic sound of R2R, coupled with the stunning clarity and clean power coming from the FA10. So, as much as I find the sound output from this amp intriguing, I'm a bit conflicted on it. Let's quickly go over the good and the bad. Let's start out with the great. It sounds amazing with electropop songs like Anthems by Charlie XCX. It's so airy, vibrant, and nimble, and the FA10 really shows off what the artist and producers are trying to achieve, which to me sounds like this beautifully sweet yet chaotic effect. Rock also sounds great here with the Empyreans and the LCD-X. Basically anything with electric guitars or electric sounding synths. The level of layering and separation with the Class A sound is really something to behold with this amp. And it's just super engaging. So for songs where a lot is going on, the FA10 is able to let you carefully pick apart the different instruments along with their notes, and you get this heightened sense of awareness of what's happening. Now let's switch to the bad, or what I didn't like about this amp. But starting off, where is the bass? One of my test songs, Blowback by Gallamateus, has a low end that sounds phenomenal on the other amps, but on the FA10 it feels like there's this sharp roll-off down low. things felt like they were just missing. Switching to either the Jotunheim 2, the Liquid Platinum, the Burson, or even the Bright SA1, and we get those great bass extensions again. Also, there's very little body in the mids if that's important to you. While the dynamics are amazing, it's not as expressive as I'd like for vocals or other instruments in the mid region. Notice how I said this amp is great at electropop. I didn't mention electronic, which spans a wider array of music. And usually it boasts spectacular bass extensions, and the FA10 struggles to portray that. The clear emphasis here is on the top end. If you use EQ, you will probably want to bump up the lower frequencies, but I did that, and even still, you're not going to get the level of bass extension as the Jot 2 or even the SA1. The top end dynamics are really fun, but I have to admit, it's not the most natural sounding to my ear. It felt like more of a lesson in just how dynamic my headphones can go at the upper frequency range. Now that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable, it's still very engaging, but if you want more of an organic feel, you may be tempted to look at the other amps. I'd switch back to the SA1, and after some more critical listening, I really appreciated the way it toned down the upper frequencies, just a hair, but it was to a point where it felt more natural and created more of a balanced sound. And as much as I love the clean sound on the FA10, the mids on the SA1 are indeed better. They have more prominence and texture, and if you know me, you know I love my mids. Realistic vocals are hard to get right, and I feel the FA10 just misses the mark here. Again, they still sound really nice, but when I switch to the SA1 and you have that comparative ability, there's a better sense of realism, and singing just sounds more natural and more pleasing on the SA1. In addition to the human voice, wind instruments are also better represented on the SA1. That's not to say the FA10 is a slouch here. It definitely has more of this visceral energy for busy moments in songs, and it outshines Singzer's amp in overall clarity and separation. But that all said, I would have to give the SA1 the nod for better overall balance. So let's go over the pros and cons. Start with the pros. The best in clarity, imaging, and transparency for the Class A amps. It really is really fun to hear the first time you hear it. Also the amazing dynamics and just the miraculous power this thing spits out, 16 watts maximum. And it has a super wide soundstage. If you like that wider soundstage, you'll definitely get it with the FA10. Let's talk about the cons now. The mids, they lack definition, texture and realism. It's not there compared to the SA1. And also the footprint. This thing is the biggest amp here. It's massive compared to the SA1. Okay, headphone test with the Flux amps. 12S on top, FA10 on bottom. Let's start with the FA10 and the Empyrean here. But I think these two sound simply fantastic. So the Empyreans are not the most resolving headphone, but you pair it with an amp, the FA10 here, that's super resolving with just tons of just clean power. And I think it makes for a great combination. It's actually pretty refreshing to hear the Empyrean sound so fast and so, I want to say, seemingly bright almost. They're a warm leaning headphone to me, but you pair it with this, it kind of changes up the sound signature, and it's really fun to listen to. Next, we'll talk about the Aria really quick. It sounds decent, but to me the edges are almost kind of too defined, and it sounds overly sharp to my ears. It's more technical versus musical. And as nice as this headphone is, I just didn't like it with the FA10. I also have to mention the mids did sound a bit more distant, and to me the mids aren't the strong suit of the Aria. And the same applies to the Sundara, the 400i. But let's talk about the 650 here. And I hate to say it, with the FA10 it did sound a bit boring and lifeless. That romance that you get from the mids normally, it seemed to disappear with the FA10. Then you switch over to the HD800S, and it gets interesting to me. I thought I would have the same experience as I did with the 650s, but I actually kind of enjoyed this pairing, HD800S, FA10. To me, these headphones really let you enjoy just how clean and powerful the amp is. For example, listening to acoustic music, I felt things were just super clear. But to be honest, I don't think I could listen to these for as long as, like, say, something as the Empyrean. Just the pairing with the HD800S, it was kind of grating after a while. It was kind of too technical, like the Aria. But to me, this is a great example of why audio nuts typically have more than one headphone. And now we'll switch over to the Verites, ZMF Verites, and it sounds really nice. It's in the case of the Flux FA10, it sounds big and bold, were the first two words that came to mind. And with that big openness, it still sounds really pleasant and not offensive to me at the same time. So the FA10 is very capable of bringing out its bigger soundstage while showing off how transparent it can be as well. So that was a fun pairing. Now we'll switch over to a quick DAC discussion, but which one do you prefer? Aries 2, smoother versus a more resolving chord cutest on top. And to me, most of the time, paired with this super resolving amp, I prefer the Aries 2. The only case where I prefer the cutest is with the smoother Mesa Empyreans. Your mileage may vary, but for the most part, I think you'll do really well with the Aries 2 and the Flux FA10. So I almost went ahead with this comparison without getting an FA12, but since I'm so annoyingly curious, I saw one in the classifieds, I picked it up, and I cannot tell you how glad I am that I decided to hold out for one. So this is the FA12S, which means it's single-ended, so it won't have as much power as its balanced brother, the FA12, which sports 4 internal amps for a true push-pull topology. But it's also $250 more at $750. This one's only $500. That all said, the overall sound signature of the FA12 versus the 12S should more or less be the same, so let's just dig into it. As for the sound, take the complaints I had with the FA10 with its lack of definition in the mid-range and wipe that away for the 12S. That super clean and energetic Flux Lab house sound is still here, but now we're getting some lovely output with female vocals and wind instruments. So this amp is noticeably smoother than the FA10, with a touch less transparency and separation, but you gain more warmth and texture. While the FA10 feels cleaner and higher frequencies have this interesting or intriguing crispness, you could argue that at times it's almost too much. The FA12S kind of smooths most of that out, presenting things like female vocals and the letter S more naturally instead of overly bright. The big caveat to all this is the punch, clarity, and dynamics is not up to par with the FA10 and its maximum 16 watts of output. They both have similar sound signatures, but with slightly different goals. FA10 with uncompromising power, clarity, and dynamics, and the FA12S with more character, better definition in the mids, and just a smoother overall sound signature. So how does the 12S compare to the Singxer SA1? Both have nicely defined mid-range and stunning clarity, but the SA1 has the edge on body, enough to where at times the sound feels fuller, more real, and most of all, more pleasing to the ear. Yes, I know I complained earlier about the lack of body on the SA1, but me preferring it here should give you an indication of where Flux amps stand on the spectrum. These are super bright amps. The big strength of the 12S is its agility. Transients are better defined, the soundstage feels bigger and more airy, and you get more clarity on the top end, again, when we're comparing to the SA1. Classical music is a complete joy here. That feeling of a wide open soundstage, superior layering and separation, presented with a really crisp sound signature, really breathes life into fast-moving orchestral music and violin solos. So as much as I love a wide soundstage, I feel the Flux amps can lean a bit too wide. It's similar to the experience I had with the Hi-Fi Man Aria. While I love that big open sound, the end result can feel a bit unfocused. It emphasizes spaciousness over intimacy. Although the 12S isn't as bright as the FA10, it's still one of the brightest amps I've ever heard. If you or your headphones prefer warmth, a warmer amp, check out the Jot 2 or the Monolith amps. So let's quickly go over the pros and cons of the FA12S. The pros: most of the pros of the FA10, but with better definition across the mids. That was the standout point with the 12S. As for the cons, it's the same cons as the FA10, but with less clarity and dynamics. And now let's do the headphone pairings with the FA12S, but I'm going to start off with my standout pairings. To me, this was the HD800S, the Sundara, and also the 650s here, HD6XXs. And compared to other headphones, music really opened up and felt alive with the HD800S. You just get that better top end clarity coupled with the 12S's more mid forward presentation, and it really made this a great pairing. And next, the 650s, they made it really well here too. I honestly wasn't expecting much after listening to the Verite, which we'll discuss later, but the mids are really fleshed out and they're done exceptionally well. It's fun and relatively dynamic when you're talking about the 650s. If you're smitten like me with this headphone, and many others as well, it may be worth checking out the FA12S here, or FA12 line of amps. And now let's talk about the Sundara. To me, things sounded just really natural, powerful, and dynamic, yet it wasn't grating or harsh at all to my ears. I think it was just the perfect match, at least when you're talking about these low-cost planars. And of course, the Aria, similar to the Sundara in many respects, but at a higher quality. I'd say it's actually the runner-up in this case because you have to factor in the price. What is this, 1,600, and this is what, 350. So you're not going to get that extra performance if you're just talking about, based on price. But with the FA12, you do get more of a presence in the mids, which is better than what I was getting with FA10. But this is a power-hungry headphone, and I did find its potential with dynamics and bass slam to excel with other amps. And now we'll switch over to the 400i's. So I thought I would have the same experience as a Sundara considering the price point, but it actually reminded me more of the Aria. I simply wanted more dynamics and more just effortless power, and I wasn't getting that here with the FA12S. And we'll switch to the Empyreans now. Now these are easier to power, of course, but I got back what I was missing from the Arias with a better bass slam. It was a more consistent and controlled sound. I've heard superior dynamics with different amps, better dynamics, power, and control, but those amps are usually above the $500 price point. Now we'll talk about the Verite really quick. It's solid, though I wish there was more extension up top. I mean, no big surprise there with the FA12S. This is nothing really to write home about. And lastly, we'll discuss DACs, but this was interesting. I actually preferred Aries 2 for planars. It gave it more of a smoother appeal. But for the cutest, on dynamics, I actually liked the better definition across the spectrum. So I don't again, it's like the other amp. I don't think you could lose with either, but this one for planars, this for dynamics. So for the overall conclusion of the Flux amps, I mentioned it before, but they're the brightest amps I've ever tested. And my personal preference leans more towards a warmer or slightly warm of neutral sound. That said, after listening to these with certain songs, I can see why people like brighter amps. I would plug in the Empyreans and just spend hours on the FA10 with Tidal Radio. Just let it play and just enjoy whatever came next. It kind of shows you your music in a different light, and I still found that to be very enjoyable. The construction, features, and specs on these are super solid, and if bright is your bag, removing the veil or whatever you want to call it, then I do not think you can do better at this price range.
Why should musical enjoyment ever be so complex? Why can't all gear be as simply wonderful as the Monolith Liquid line of amps? Warm, soothing, effortless. All reasons why the Liquid Platinum was such an instant hit when it was released in 2018. As hard as it was for Monoprice to keep them in stock, they ended up releasing the Liquid Gold the following year, which comes with the DAC built in. Groovy. Now let's see how these amps stack up to the current competition.
I know the Liquid Platinum is technically a hybrid amp that uses tubes for its input stage, but it's still one of the most popular amps under the $1,000 price range, so why not include it? I actually bought one of these when it first came out. Similar to the Drop 789, there was a fair bit of hype for this amp, and both happened to be released in the same year, 2018. The Platinum's pre-release buzz was bolstered by the pedigree of its designer, Alex Cavalli. His resume is impressive, to say the least. Just check his LinkedIn page. I won't go into too much detail, but he and his team created one of the first internet search engines, one of the first web browsers, and over time his interest grew towards circuit design. Lucky for us, he started building amps as a passion project in the early to mid 2010s. So how does this all translate to his partnership with parts supplier Monoprice, the company that manufactures and sells the Liquid Platinum? Sounds like a great idea, right? Leverage an electronics giant for cost-saving mass production with the experience and know-how of an engineering phenom like Cavalli. In a nutshell, the Liquid Platinum sounds full, rich, and forgiving. But as for that last part, you may end up thinking that's actually a fault. So I'll start off with what I love about the Liquid Platinum, and it's its velvety smooth presentation of the mid-range and upper frequencies. The way it handles spoken S's and high-frequency cymbal dynamics is pleasing to hear, and it takes the edge off. It doesn't feel sibilant or harsh. Take your HD800S's and your poor and tired ears connected to the Liquid Platinum, and there you go. Instant TLC for your eardrums, getting rid of just about any complaint you had previously of harshness or any grating, glaring effects. That all said, as smooth sounding as the vocals are, it sacrifices on clarity. It distinctly sounds compressed compared to the other amps here. Now, it's not by a jaw-dropping amount, but enough to where I noticed there were more details and information in the upper mid region coming from pretty much every single other amp here. Things like reverb or slight echoes from a voice and the micro details that comes along with it, plus the texture of a stringed instrument, were much more apparent and defined on the other amps. Transients suffered too, or a cymbal hit or a snare drum would sound more natural or tonally lifelike on the Burson or even the SA1. Lower mids and bass have a fun, engaging presence, but again, there's a loss of resolution. There's this great song someone from the audio meetup had us testing. It's called Suite for Drum Set and Percussion Ensemble. And on the Jot 2, it has a much better portrayal of the bass drum, letting you feel every inch of that reverb. The Liquid Platinum kind of just mushes it together, giving you less of a sense of the space that it's in. Another song, Pizza Guy by Touch Sensitive, has a flurry of bass synthesizers, and again, there's better definition all around on the Jotunheim compared to the Liquid Platinum. And one thing I wanted to test, how much of a difference do the input tubes actually make? How much of a euphonic sound is it going to provide? Let's compare the Platinum to the Liquid Gold and the Singstar SA1. And we'll use the song Flamenco Sketches by Miles Davis. And of course we have to use the Verite. At 4 minutes and 48 seconds of this song, Miles holds a big note and then follows up with quick blows of his trumpet. Even with the SA1's relaxed Class A sound, the trumpet sounded smaller, with less reverb, and a bit more flat. The Platinum, however, gave the trumpet this round and sweet presence with superior holographics, which to me really breathed life into the song and other jazz songs in general. The big benefit of the SA1 here is a better portrayal of the micro details. I can hear slight nuances in the trailing reverb of the instruments, along with the ancillary things like rustling and fidgeting in the recording booth. This may go back to the compressed nature of the monolith amp. As compared to the Liquid Gold, it's nearly indistinguishable, but listening on the highly resolving HD800S shows those euphonic qualities on the trumpet better with the Platinum, whereas the Gold definitely presents this part with a touch more precision. But it's not night and day. If you're looking for a tube sound, I'd go with a dedicated tube amp. So going over the pros and cons here, you get that smooth and big powerful sound. This powers pretty much everything. This doesn't have a gain switch. The Liquid Gold does, this does not, but I didn't need it. With my Aria, very power hungry headphone, this was fine. Also, I'd say it's the best volume knob of the bunch. It's smooth, it has great resistance, and it sticks out enough so you're not touching it like a pair of tweezers. But since this amp gets unbelievably hot, that kind of trickles down here and to your fingers. Not a big deal, just letting you know. As for the cons, I mentioned it before, but the sound output is a bit compressed. Details are missing at higher frequencies, bass is not as tight and defined as other models, and it's the hottest amp here, hotter than the Liquid Gold. So if you're going to use this in the summer, it's something to keep in mind. And lastly, the price, Monoprice Liquid Platinum. Checking right now on their website, it's $800. That's the retail price, but it usually goes on sale. Definitely during Black Friday. There was a sale back in early June. I think it was 400 something. So it kind of fluctuates, but I would not buy this for $800. I think it's just too expensive. So I don't have it right here in front of me. It's back with its owner, but I got some B-roll for you. But overall, it has a very similar sound signature to the Liquid Platinum, surprise, surprise. But there are some notable differences. The major similarity is that velvety smooth mid and upper mid presentation, which I adored on the Liquid Platinum. Thank goodness it is on the Liquid Gold X as well. The biggest differences I noted were the dynamics and the clarity. Now let's just go through them one at a time. The Liquid Gold has this feeling of effortless authority when those big and busy parts of songs come on. This includes the bass slam, where the Gold surpasses the Platinum. Where I said the Platinum can sound a tad compressed in the mid to upper mid range, the Gold noticeably has more definition across the spectrum. Going back to that song City Love by John Mayer, when the string section comes on, there's a better degree of layering and clarity here, to where you get a better feel and awareness of the many instruments it took to create this song. So I praise the Monolith's warm capabilities. Let's test the opening of Vibin' Out by FKJ. I love this song, but you get those bassy organ notes followed by a sweet sounding female vocal. As much as I like the rich sounding Monoliths, when I compare directly to the Jotunheim 2, they sound a bit veiled. You can get a better grasp of the organ tremolo and even the air oscillating between the notes better on the Jotunheim here, plus the female vocals sound recognizably clearer and sweeter on this $400 amp. The warmth factor is indeed better on the Monoliths, but not enough for me to get over the lack of clarity, unfortunately. There are many times when that buttery smooth sound works in the Liquid Gold's favor. Synthesizers sound big and engulfing, giving you that big and warm feeling. But much like the Platinum, that compressed sound is still there. The way it forcibly rolls off the highs makes S's and cymbal hits a bit lifeless. The beginning of that song Drum Set Suite Again by Ozone Percussion Group shows just how much better the soloist is at transients. It truly is a case of where you're listening to the amp versus listening to the music. It's simply coloring the sound a bit too much when it comes to percussion. That's not to say you can't have an enjoyable time with the Liquid Gold. That velvety smooth mid-forward presentation is really fun. The Monolith amps have a certain sound to them, but in the world of current competition, it may be hard to really recommend these over something like the Jotunheim 2, the SA1, or the Burson Soloist. I think if they bumped up the clarity a bit and kind of provided the fuller picture, in addition to that velvety smooth sound, they'd really have a better competitor here. Now I'll speak quickly to the internal DAC of the Liquid Gold X. I tested that as well. After all, it's part of the reason they're asking for $1,000. It is a DAC amp combo. And if you've been reading anything about the Liquid Gold X, you know the common complaint, which is if you don't use the internal DAC, you just use it as an amp, then you have the notification lights on the front just constantly blinking. Who decided that? But as for comparison's sake, let's compare the Cutest to the Liquid Gold X's DAC. Surprise, surprise, I prefer the Cutest. It's more resolving, it's less veiled, with sweeter highs and distinctively more clarity. I also prefer the layering and separation on the Cutest, but the Cutest alone costs more than the Liquid Gold X, the DAC amp combo. You would hope it would outperform the DAC in this case. Against the Aries 2, the internal DAC actually held its own. So with Delta Sigma chips, you typically get those higher resolving capabilities versus R2R, which tends to be smoother, organic, and satisfyingly crisp. I personally found the Gold to pair better with the Delta Sigma options here, considering how smooth the amp is out of the box. I know I made some fun generalizations there, but as much as I love the Aries 2, I find that it shines best when it's mated with an amp that has less of a colored or overly warm sound signature. This is probably why I didn't prefer it with the Liquid Gold X. So quick pros and cons, go through the pros. The same buttery smooth sound signature as the Liquid Platinum. Really cool form factor, I love how these look. And you have that solid bass impact. The bass slam is really, really nice here. As for the cons, why does the Liquid Gold X exist? It's not that much different than the Liquid Platinum, especially when you're considering the sound. They both also get very, very hot. I could forgive this on a tube amp, but why the Liquid Gold X gets almost as hot as this is beyond me. I have no idea why, but it's something you should know, especially if you plan to listen to it or use it in the summer. Also, you get that compressed sound. It happens with this. It also applies to the Liquid Gold X. And the price, $1,000. I know you're getting a DAC with it, but it's still a lot of money for something that has a lot of competitors out now. And lastly, the worst toggle interface I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen a digital toggle that felt like a puzzle. But are there people who I'd recommend these to? Sure. If you absolutely hate sibilance or are super sensitive to upper frequency glare, you value a fuller and richer sound, micro details be damned, then a monolith liquid amp could be for you, if you don't mind the added heat and the higher price. Okay, now with the headphone test with the Liquid Platinum, I wish I had the Liquid Gold, but that's back with its owner. But you know, they sound very similar anyway, so we're just gonna stick with this for the headphone test. Let's start off with the Verite. Big, open, and smooth. That's what I have to say. I think it brings out really good qualities in the Verite. I've heard the Verite sound better, but considering how smooth this amp is, I think it's an excellent pairing with the Verite. I don't think you'll be generally upset. Move over to the Empis, and as you could imagine, it sounds like this, big and open and smooth, but it adds the characteristic of being more forgiving than the Verite. It's not to a point where you think it'll be dull. In my opinion, it's actually one of those fun pairings where you can kind of just turn these on and set it on autopilot. And if you're like me, if you work from home now, you can just set these two on in the background and it won't, jar you or kind of take you away from your work. It's just like a smooth, pleasing experience, which leads me to the Aria. Here's where you think, a $1,600 headphone on an $800 amp, and you'd automatically think it would sound great. I honestly thought the Liquid Platinum made the Aria sound a bit subdued, almost a bit flat, arguably. I've heard this sound so dynamic, and in my opinion, I think you can do much better for the money. So the Liquid Platinum simply doesn't bring out its best. Switch here to the HD800S. This actually, to me, was a really surprisingly good pairing, especially with the upper mids. If you know this headphone, it can sound generally bright, sometimes harsh, but with the Liquid Platinum here, the smooth sounds of the Liquid Platinum, it kind of reins in those harshness tones from the HD800S that they may put out, and it makes it sound really pleasing. The Liquid Platinum, I mentioned it before, it's not the most dynamic headphone amp, but it may actually suit you if you're looking for just something you like the brightness of the HD800S, but you want something a bit more smooth. That may be a good pairing for you. And as for the HD6XX, this to me was kind of a disappointment. This is where things kind of fell flat and dull for me. To me, it just sounded a bit overly compressed. It is an inexpensive headphone, and it will bring out the best mids that your amp can muster. But if you don't feed them a decent amount of high frequencies, things can quickly sound dull, and in my opinion, that's exactly what happened here. And the Blonde BO3s, it's kind of the same story. Aside from those smooth mids, this pairing was nothing to write home about. The overall feeling was again lifeless and dull, and it really wanted me to switch to the next amp, so I didn't think it was a good pairing at all. So that does it for part 2. Stay tuned for part 3, where I hope to review amps between the $1,000 and $2,000 price point. This includes the Solo S3X Performance, the Wells Audio Milo, the Violectric V280 and the new V340, the GSX Mini, and if budget allows, maybe a Audio God Master 9, a Bryston HPA1, and a Fonender X. If there are any amps that I'm missing that you'd also like me to review, please say so in the comments. And also if you have one that I can borrow, please let me know too, send me an email. So I hope you're finding this series useful, and I really appreciate all the love and support you guys are throwing me in the comments, so thanks for that. Hope you're enjoying your time with friends and family around the holidays, and I'll see you guys in the next one. So long.